Okay, so you're here for some great church leadership content. The podcast is great, but there's also another piece of content you need to be enjoying each week. It is the Leading Saints email newsletter. Now, I get it. Email newsletters feel so 2006, you know? But it isn't as old-fashioned as you might think. It's actually one of the most popular pieces of content that Leading Saints produces. Each week, I share a unique leadership thought that can only be found in the newsletter. I keep it short and sweet. Most can read it in less than 5 minutes. And then we share with you recent content you might have missed, throwback episodes, and Leading Saints events that happen more often than you might anticipate. If you want to make sure you are on the email list, simply visit leadingsaints.org/14. That's leadingsaints.org/14. That will also get you 14 days access to our full library of content not available to the general public. So look for Leading Saints in your inbox by going to leadingsaints.org/14 or click the link in the show notes. Before we jump into the content of this episode, I kind of feel it's important that I introduce myself. Now, many of you have been around a long time. You're well familiar with my voice and with Leading Saints as an organization. But if you're not, well, my name is Kurt Frankum, and I am the executive director of Leading Saints and the podcast host. Now, Leading Saints is a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping Latter-day Saints be better prepared to lead. And we do that through, well, content creation like this podcast and many other resources at leadingsaints.org. And we don't act like we have all the answers or know exactly what a leader should do or not do, but we like to explore the concepts of leadership, the science of leadership, what people are researching about leadership, and see how we can apply them to a Latter-day Saint world. So here we go. Today, I'm in downtown Salt Lake City with two executive producers of the world-famous project called The Chosen, and that's Brad Pelo and Derral Eves. How are you two?
Great.
Doing dandy today.
Nice.
Beautiful morning in Salt Lake.
Yeah. Now, you two don't live here. You're down south in Washington County, somewhere down there.
That's right. Derral lives in Hurricane. I'm in Tokerville, about 5 miles away.
Nice.
And we love the winters down there.
And you're up in Salt Lake in July, right? So it's maybe a little bit cooler. But now, we originally, Brad and you and I got connected, and I showed up here thinking I'd interview you, and you said, hey, Derral's in the other room. Why don't he's an executive producer on this project. Let's bring him in. And Derral, whether you like it or not, you're in front of a microphone.
I got volunteered. That's like the story of my life.
Right. So, Derral, maybe just give us your background if people aren't familiar with you and some of the projects you worked on, and then how you got involved with The Chosen, especially as a Latter-day Saint.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm one of 10 kids, and I think we're as Mormon as you can get. I know that we're not supposed to say the Mormon thing, but guess what? We're as Mormon as you can get.
Okay, all right.
So pretty much all my ancestors were baptized between 1830 and 1865. So they came across the plains, and my great-great-grandfather settled the area where I live, down in Laverkin. And so kind of grew up there, fell in love with it, related to half the town. You know how that is, getting in trouble all the time because everybody knows who you are. But outside of that, it was just like finding, pure joy was being surrounded by family for me, and really had a fascination with video. I really wanted to make Super Bowl commercials when I was a kid.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I just was on that quest. And so went through school, got my degree in marketing and advertising, got a couple job offers in LA with some firms that create Super Bowl commercials and a couple in Chicago. And that was kind of the moment in my journey where my wife and I made a very big decision, which was, do we go follow our passions or dreams for a career, or do we take a step for our family? And for me, I wanted my kids to grow up around grandma and grandpa and have their cousins be their best friends, because that was really, really important to me. And so we were at a pivotal point. What do we do? And so we decided to stay in Southern Utah and forego that dream, of working with some big agency, world-class agency. So when you can't work for a world-class agency, you start your own agency. And that's what I did out of school. I just started my own agency, and I was doing a lot of working with local businesses, helping them with their website. This is back in '99. So we were doing website, getting some directories, because that was back in the day. Directories were pretty big, and then some hosting companies that we owned, and basically built a digital empire, helping just mom and pops just capitalize on YouTube. On the internet. But what's funny though was a lot of these businesses only had dial-up. We're like, you got to be on the internet. You got to have a website. They're like, what? Okay, but yeah, we're a little slow down in Southern Utah. But so that's kind of how it all started. And then for me, there's a couple moments of clarity on where I should go. One was in 2005. I was on Craigslist because my company was expanding. We were looking to be frugal, so we're trying to get a free desk or something for the new, workstation that we had to put up there. And I saw this ad for this brand new platform called YouTube, and they were going to give away an iPod. And I'm like, okay, I'm all in, because the iPods were about the size of a brick at that time. Yeah. But Steve Jobs just said, hey, there's just a brand new iPod. It's called iPad Nano. It's like, pack of gum. And I'm like, I'm all in. So I went to this website called YouTube, didn't know what it was. And my jaw dropped because that was the first time I was able to see you could hit play and videos would actually play on the internet. They didn't have to buffer all the way to the end before they started to play. And then I saw this really cool tool. This is in October 2005, that you could actually embed these videos on websites. And the first thing for me as an entrepreneur, I'm like, okay, this is an upsell. I can literally upsell every website that I've ever created and have them put a video on their website. And so that happened for the next 2005, 2006, and into 2007. We made 865 videos. Got them all embedded on
for different companies.
Yeah, just different companies, mom and pop shops, doctors, dentists, lawyers, all that fun stuff, and just kind of embedded on their websites. And somehow magically in 2007, when Google bought YouTube, that all those videos started to rank in Google search. So they'd outrank the websites that we actually had put a lot of time, energy, effort to do. And I'm like, okay, saw the opportunity with video. And for me, it was like, okay, let's go ahead and not do website design anymore, not do SEO anymore, and just focus in on video and YouTube. And there's nobody really doing it, and this is kind of the future. And I always had a love and passion for video, and that's where it started. And then later that year, we were just doing exclusively video. I had a client of mine that says, hey, there's a company down in St. George that are trying to sell pianos online, and they need your help. And so I went down, met the owner of the piano store, and he showed me a video that he made to, showcase his piano. And they're trying to sell, these Yamaha, grand pianos. And my jaw dropped. I was like, that's an amazing music video. Like, how many pianos have you sold? He's like, 0. I'm like, oh man. But then the journey was, over the next 18 months, was to see kind of my passion and love of what I'm really good at. I feel like God's given me a couple gifts that helps me accelerate in this area, which is, seeing a content creator create content and seeing audiences love that content and want to share it. And so over the next 18 months, this small piano store that had 10,000 subscribers got to 1.8 million subscribers, about 230 million video views. That's the Piano Guys, if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah. I was actually I was speaking on a cruise last January with them, and they told that story because I've always wondered why are they called the Piano Guys when there's a guy with
piano store called the Piano Guys.
But that's the name of the store, right? And so they've kept that brand, and now they're very successful because of those videos, right?
Yeah, and so that's kind of how it all started for me, and then that's when you have the serendipitous moment. Was when I was a young kid, I wanted to create Super Bowl commercials, and you want to figure out why. Like, why did I want to do that? Well, I wanted to actually create content that was funny and engaging that people talked about over weeks, if not months. And that was kind of my why. I was like, oh, I see where that's at. And then I realized that YouTube could be that vehicle to create content that could really elevate the world, bring joy into the world, bring light into the world. And then two, with that, I'm able to feel satisfied in the sense of, hey, people are talking about it, people are sharing. And so that's kind of where my journey began. And then outside of that, I met a a couple of producers down in California, and they had this sketch comedy show on this no-name network called BYU Television. And they're like, hey, we want to go on YouTube. And so I worked with Studio C to get them, kind of established and getting a rhythm and working with the complexities of the church, because it's interesting, let me tell you.
I'm sure that and many other podcasts episodes.
Like literally, it was one of those things that I'm like, okay, I'm glad I have a testimony of the truthfulness of Jesus. But anyway, I was able to see that, and they got a couple billion video views, and I literally was just bringing in content creators that I felt like could contribute, and that God gave them specific gifts to give to the world, and YouTube was the platform. And since then we did 87 billion video views on YouTube, and like I can't even count how many channels that we've taken over 1 million subscribers. I know that 37 of them we started from just the idea and implement it and go from there. So that's kind of how it all started for me. And then where it all weaves into The Chosen is I own a conference where all these big YouTubers come in because they're like, hey, we want to learn about the business side of YouTube and all that other stuff. And I always have a standing invitation that anyone that keynotes at one of my conferences could come for life. Like, cool. They can come for free for life if they ever want to come back. And one of the friends of mine that I worked on with the largest live nativity. I don't know if you remember that.
I saw that.
So I was a producer on that. He was the other producer on that as well. It was a Piano Guys, Mormon Tabernacle.
Yeah, every Latter-day Saint influencer.
Exactly. That was my job to get them all there. But anyway, it was amazing. And then that's kind of where I got to know him. And then we did this little ad called the Squatty Potty Pooping Unicorn ad. I was the executive producer with him as well. And so we were giving the case study the prior year at Vid Summit, and he was the keynote. And anyway, he asked to come back. And then he told me, no, he wasn't coming. And so I'm at the conference. I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then I get this random text and he says, is my ticket still good? And I says, yes. And he goes, okay, I'm coming. And I says, okay, that's interesting. So he got on a plane in Provo, flew down to LA. And he comes into this conference, and here's like putting on a conference is pretty stressful. You have thousands of people that's there, and then you have big, there as well. And there's a lot of logistics that goes on, and it's just a short amount of time to create an amazing experience. And so my head's like going a million. I'm in putting out fire mode, right? And here he comes up. He's like, hey, Derral, like I need to show you a video. I'm like, couldn't you just email me the video? And this is Jeffrey Harmon, who's one of the founders of Harmon Brothers and also Angel Studios. And I'm like, can't you just just email it to me? He goes, no, you need to see this. And I says, well, I'm kind of busy right now. Can't you see like this is like whatever? And I went to walk away, and then the thought came to me. He just flew all the way from Provo to LA to want to show me a video. So the least I can do to go watch the video. And so I found a little room. We kind of went into this cubbyhole, and he pulled out what he was going to play the video on. And it was a 9-inch Chromebook. It was like the smallest Chromebook in the history of life. It was the worst sound in the world. And he says there's this creator that made this short film for his church, and I want you to watch it. It's like 19 minutes or whatever. I said, I don't got 19 minutes, man. But we sat down, and it was really good. It was Dallas Jenkins created this short film called The Shepherd.
I think you see it on YouTube still.
Yeah, right? You can see it on YouTube and in the Chosen app for sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was this short film that he made, and I'm like, oh, this is actually good, because like I'm really like, one of the things I love is great content, and there's certain elements of great content. I could see that it was extremely low budget. Like he was like pulling miracles out of some of the stuff there. And it really pulled me into the character. And I'm like, man, if he's able to pull me into that character this quick, I'm like, what could he do with a bigger budget? What's going on, And we get to a point where, I'm rooting for this shepherd that's the lowliest of the lows. Like he's literally cast out. And in the hierarchy of first century, the lowest class citizen is a Samaritan shepherd, you're saying in Jerusalem. But what's even lower class than a shepherd in Jerusalem and Samaria and stuff like that would be the lowest shepherd on the totem pole, and so that was this guy. And what I loved was his desire to want to know about the Messiah. He was looking for that redemption. He was looking for the hope, because like his life was in a very difficult position, and he was wanting that, and he wanted to learn. And that's where he went into the town and was ridiculed by the other shepherds, and then went into the synagogue. And this is kind of where it hit me, was he just wanted to learn about Messiah, and he was kicked out for being unclean. And they just kind of pushed aside, and you could tell that he was crushed. And the moment that he took the step out, there was a man and a wife that was looking for the well, because they just came a long distance to come pay taxes. And they, his pregnant bride was thirsty, and he explained where the well was, but then he realized he had water on him, and he just gave Mary his water. And that, I'm like, I don't know who thought of this. That's so good, but it just pulled you in. It's like, it was so symbolic.
Yeah.
Here he is giving water to the person that's going to give the everlasting water.
Yeah.
And so fast forward, I know this is like the longest intro of all time, but fast forward, I says, the knock came on the door, and they says, Derral, we need you. And I turned to Jeffrey. I says, I got to go. He says, no, this is like not the best part. I says, I got enough of it. I go, I know where this is going. I know what this is about. I just want to be a part of it. Like, even if I have to hold the light, I'm willing to be a part of it. He says, good. I want you to go meet Dallas this next week up in Provo. And so the following Monday, I flew up to Provo from LA, met with Dallas for the first time, and he shared his vision for a television show. And I felt like, wow, that's really great. And the perspective was, growing up in our church culture, there were certain things that had kind of always rubbed me wrong. And one of the things is sometimes we don't like to see the true nature of people, like the human side of nature. We like to oh no, they're so great, and we don't get to see all the things. And this is like literally seeing broken people being called by Jesus to lead, and you get to see these broken people transform but still struggle. And I just love that. And so anyway, I called my wife up. I says, hey, we're going to be investing in a TV show about Jesus. She says, oh, that's fine, dear. Whatever. And Dallas and I started the business that day. We had zero money in the bank account, and we had 0 followers on social media, but we had a really great idea. And we had a mechanism. That's where Angel Studios came in, and they had a mechanism to go after the crowd, which I've been doing audience development my whole career, of just developing audiences and get them excited about this TV show. And so we had a piece of content, which was the shepherd, that had impacted me and impacted Jeffrey, and impacted his brother Neil. And that piece that Dallas made that brought light to his small congregation in Chicago was now bringing people to be aware of a TV show. And we broke the all-time crowdfunding record of film and television. And then the next issue was trying to get people to watch it, but that's another story for sure. But that's my whole life story.
Awesome.
Like, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And now you're in the midst of recording season 3 and just about done. And
thankfully we had Brad to help us pull this off.
Awesome. All right, Brad, what about you? How did you get involved in all this? What's some of your background and whatnot?
Well, I just learned that I also shared a passion as a young man for making TV commercials. I didn't know that about Derral. But I'm a little older than him, and so I happened to be a kid who had a video system, and it was the only one in town. So even as a teenager, I was making commercials because I could. But I always wanted to kind of grow up to be in the media space. But after my mission, it was the heydays of the PC, and everybody was crazy about the IBM PC, and I had kind of an entrepreneurial heart, and so I got involved in creating some tech companies over the next 10 to 15 years that kind of were defining in their own ways. And when I say involved, I consider myself always a co-founder or a member of the founding team. And so first in the kind of search business, what today we think of as Google, in the mid-'80s, together with other co-founders, created a company called Folio, which was a search engine for CD-ROMs. And we created the first searchable scriptures. That was, as a newly returned missionary, exciting to be able to beat everyone at Scripture Chase. And in fact,
and this was on a PC.
This was on a PC.
Software.
Yeah. So you take it to church. You take a whole PC to church.
This wasn't something that was yet sold at Deseret Book or anything.
No. We, in fact, the challenge was we didn't have hard drives yet, so everything was on a floppy, and so we had to fit everything on one. In fact, funny story, we demonstrated this one day to some of the brethren, and Elder Perry, no longer living, was going to speak at the Marriott Center. They used to do Friday night 14-stake firesides. And he was going to be the speaker, and he said, I want to do a scripture chase with the students. Can we set up a computer at the podium, and I'll use your software, and I'll challenge anyone to a scripture chase. And you have to appreciate we didn't have internet in those days. Most people didn't have a PC. And so he stood at the pulpit and challenged students to come beat him at a scripture chase. And they would come up and, it'd say, name any word you want. And we all thought, this is an apostle. He has an amazing memory. But he was actually searching on the computer. Anyway, funny story. And then I was fortunate enough to just be involved in the very earliest days of Ancestry. Paul Allen was the founder there with his partner Dan, and Paul's my brother-in-law, and so he invited me to kind of come use my operational experience to help get that going. Wasn't there very long when I got a call from the family who owned Bookcraft, the LDS publishing company. And maybe many of your audience wouldn't even remember Bookcraft, but Bookcraft was, in its day, the publisher of most all of the apostles, Elder Packer, Elder Maxwell, McConkie, Mormon Doctrine was published by us. And then also we introduced the fiction space, so The Work and the Glory was a big...
Did you tennis shoes by Minify?
I think we did. I don't remember, actually. That was before my time.
That's what I was reading in the early 90s.
Yeah, that may have been Covenant. But I ended up buying the company with Alan Ashton, a friend, and as the new publisher, this young, never been in the publishing world before, my vision and Alan's vision was to see if we could, with the advent of the internet, bring content to the worldwide church. LDS publishing was always in English. It was always limited to bookstores, and the bookstores, frankly, were mostly on the Wasatch Front. There was, if there was one in your area, it was near a temple, and so we had this vision for being able to create a place. We called it LDS World. That was our domain, and a place where people could come and create community and consume content. And
this was what year about?
This would have been in the late 90s.
Okay. So the internet's here, but it's slow.
It's very slow. Yep. In fact, ironically, I would say that the biggest challenge we had is the internet was seen as a scary place. This is where you go to get porn, for example. In fact, I remember the early days of Ancestry, an analyst came back and said, the number one use of the internet is porn, and number two is family history. How did that happen? So now at Bookcraft, we're saying, really, we should be spreading the gospel with this. We should be creating community with the internet. And so the blessing of kind of being involved in those early days was that we got to do a lot of firsts. The founders at Ancestry had also founded a company called Infobases, which was a collection of LDS content. So they had licensed all the Deseret Book products, the church news, and so we acquired Infobases as part of the Bookcraft deal, and we put all that up on the internet. So now you could search hundreds and hundreds of classical church publications and publish copyrighted books. And then we gathered up all the old ensigns, we put them in boxes, and we shipped them to China. And the process is called double keying. There were no electronic versions of church magazines in those days. And so Chinese people who don't speak our language would literally look at the character on the page and find it on the keyboard and type it. And then someone else would retype that same page. And if they matched, then it was committed to the database. If it didn't match, they'd have to redo it till they both typed in the same letter. Anyway, long story short, those boxes of church magazines came back as floppy disks that contained all the church's magazines up until that point. And so we put those out there to be searched. We got permission from Bonneville to broadcast the first general conference via the internet. And then we started to create Warden Stake websites. And we had conversations with the brethren at the time. Nothing officially was happening from the church around the internet. They had registered some domains, but there was no kind of place to go. And then one day we got a knock at the door, and a representative from the Office of the First Presidency came, and they said, we wonder if we could just acquire Bookcraft and everything you're doing in this electronic realm on the internet. And so that team became the genesis of what we know today as LDS.org. And I had an opportunity to kind of stick with the team if I wanted to. I chose not to. My dad worked for the church and had for years, and I wasn't my dad. I love my dad, but I was a bit of a free spirit.
Yeah.
And so it was at that point that I said, as a kid, I wanted to be in media. And when I was at Bookcraft, I met a producer in Hollywood by the name of Jerry Mullen. And Jerry had not necessarily been active in his faith, but he had been raised in an LDS home. And he said, well, let's go make some movies together. I'm going to be retiring. He was Steven Spielberg's producer.
Oh, wow.
So he'd just come off winning an Oscar for Schindler's List. And together with another LDS gentleman that worked there in the studio system, John Garbett, who now works for the church, the three of us went and produced a film called The Legend of Johnny Lingo. Oh, wow. It was a remake of the old BYU film, and successfully launched it with MGM and brought it to the world. And that kind of whetted my appetite for film and television. And so I went on other titles that people might be familiar with. Forever Strong, the story of
Larry Gilwitz.
Larry Gilwitz.
I've interviewed him on the podcast.
Larry's a great friend. So that was kind of my media experience. And long story short now, and it turns out my introduction's as long as yours, I ended up in New York City. And one of my companies called I.TV was acquired by DirecTV based in New York City, brought me there, and I got involved in some projects that kind of melded technology and media together. And that drew the attention of Bonneville, the church-owned media company, to what I was doing. And they asked if I would come lead a new team that they were creating at Bonneville called Radiant. And Radiant's mission was to create media and content and influence that wasn't necessarily religious, but it was all about bringing light into the world. And that's where I was when COVID hit. And, New York City in the early stages of COVID were not a friendly place. Yeah. And so we came to Utah, where our grandchildren were, and we wanted to just, work remotely and spend time here. And that's when I met Derral and Dallas. They were searching for a set to shoot season 2. And because of my work at Bonneville, I was aware of not only the existence of the chosen set, but kind of how it was managed and decisions were made. And so I reached out to them, and Dallas flew out. We met for the first time in my Jeep as we went out to Goshen, Utah.
He's the slowest driver in Utah.
Inside joke. But we hung out at Goshen for the first time, which is where we've been this week as well, filming season 3. So that was my introduction. I've been associated with The Chosen and Angel Studios for the last 2 years. as an executive producer, and now the president. So he gives me all the hard stuff to do. But yeah, it's just a great team. We love being involved.
That's awesome. And as far as the story behind the Goshen set, like, was it as simple as maybe a few phone calls? I mean, is that something the church has always planned to do?
Anything simple in the church? Come on.
You don't hold back on that, don't you? I love it.
I'm not afraid to speak my mind. That's the only way you change, right?
But I mean, was the church originally planning to let other production companies use the set, or was it a hard sell to get them there?
The dedicatory prayer that Elder Bednar gave over that was, he prayed for that. They just didn't have the mechanism in place to make it happen.
Gotcha.
It took a lot of energy and effort. So we did a music video there for the piano guys.
Oh yeah.
That was the first, external, but it was going back towards a Boncom Christmas, initiative. So it was like kind of one step outside of the church. But did you know that Radiant's first project was the largest?
I do know that.
Okay, yeah. That was the very first.
Chris Carlson?
Yeah, that was the very first one, because it was like we were getting it all together. Like, how are we going to do this? So Foundation, Radiant, that's what it is. Sherry's like, we got Radiant Foundation. It's like, okay, we're going for it.
You got it started.
That was the first project. It was just funny.
Nice.
Inside baseball, sorry.
No, you're fine.
I mean, but that's what you get on a podcast, right?
That's right. And so, what was I going to ask about that? Let's sort of pivot back towards something you said, Derral, as far as like, you wanted to create content that people talked about. So imagine we're in front of a room full of church leaders, bishops, Relief Society presidents. And my background, obviously, I've created a content production organization, right, with leading saints. But I'm a marketing guy. And so as I approach some of the past leadership callings I've seen them as I'm creating a content experience on Sunday that ideally people will talk about. So you've both been bishops. How did these principles manifest themselves maybe in that role? Or what advice would you give to leaders to say, how would you create a chosen-like experience on Sunday?
I love that question for like on a very deep level. Because one of the issues that I faced growing up was, when I would go to church at the time in my congregation and in surrounding congregations, we didn't really talk a lot about Jesus. And I'm like, huh. And when I was a missionary in Paraguay, I remember taking, investigators there, and I'm like, okay, please don't go off the rails. Let's talk of Christ. Let's rejoice of Christ. Let's preach of Christ. Let's prophesy of Christ, right? And yet not much talking about it. And so I'm not one to like complain. Like I'll just get it done. And the moment that I had some significant leadership, the first one was I was in the stake mission presidency when that was a thing. It was like 2 months after my mission. Got put into that for a little bit, and then I was the Elders Quorum president after that. And just I had some leadership roles were there, but the biggest one was when I was in the bishopric. I was trying to convince the bishop that we really need to focus in on Jesus and that every talk should be there. And it'd kind of be hit or miss because every bishop feels called to do certain things, and there's a big age gap. I was still in my young 20s, and he was in his older 70s, and so it was like. It was tough, but as soon as I was made bishop, I was still in my 20s, and I vowed that every person that got up in front of the congregation would talk of Christ, and every talk would be about Jesus Christ. And if they could not weave that in, they need to deepen their relationship with Jesus a little bit more. And so we're very specific on how we extended the assignment to speak and the intention. We had a sister that was really put off because I'd ask her to speak about 4 times a year. And she's like, there's other people in the ward that can do this, right? And I go, Sister DeMille, I got on my knees. I prayed what the ward needed. You came to mind, and here's your subject. Like, I'm not going to deny that. Like, how am I supposed to deny that?
Yeah.
And she just had this very curt, a plain, simple way of just getting through all the BS and just really talking about a relationship with Jesus, which is beautiful. Well, later, her husband became the stake president. I was his counselor,
Nice.
in the stake presidency. But that's kind of where it all started for me, is just being more than, hey, it's your turn to assign, the talks this month, who's going to do what, but be prayerful on how can we deepen the relationship of every person that walks into this congregation, member or non, to walk away with a stronger desire to know Jesus. And that became my quest. Yeah. And for me, that's what it's all about. Like everything else, I work a lot with the youth, and youth is my thing. It really is. And I found that the way that we approach our youth is wrong in some aspects. I think culturally it's wrong. I think it's done. We have our own church culture of how we do it. We try to shame them and guilt them into doing things instead of saying, you know what, let's strengthen your relationship with Jesus. First off, let's get your relationship with Jesus, and let's strengthen that. Because once you have it, you'll want to do all those things. You won't want to do the path that takes you away from that relationship that you could have. Yeah. And I think if ward councils and bishoprics and the brothers and sisters, in leadership positions and parents, if they will actively look at how can we just strengthen, everyone's relationship with Jesus more. What are the topics that are keeping us from having a deeper relationship? And I think the biggest thing, and over the course of serving as bishop for 6.5 years and in the stake presidency for 9.5, like I've been able to see a lot, but I think now I have a completely deeper desire for that. The more that I rub shoulders with other people that do have beautiful relationships with Jesus, and with God, and seeing, their heart. And for me, that's what I think that the church needs more of. Yeah. I'm not saying that we're absent of that, but I think our focus is on doing things instead of really focusing on a relationship. Yeah. And so I think that would be the biggest advice. And I can tell you from The Chosen, we're actively trying to create content on social media and in the production that can facilitate that for all levels, like for young and old, and have it be a multi-generational thing, because truth is truth and Jesus is Jesus. And I'm telling you, when people get to know who the real Jesus is, that's when everything just turns upside down for them, because then they realize, oh, I had these preconceived ideas of who Jesus was and is that are not true. And now I know, and he's willing to forgive me. Yeah. He's willing to love me. He's willing to just be patient with me, as I struggle. And it makes the atonement that much more important. And so I think at the end of the day, and this is in defense of anyone that's listening to this podcast that have felt like, I got to do what my priesthood leaders tell me to do, and I need to follow the handbook exactly what we need to do. And, you're very programmatic in your approach because that's the expectation of a leader in the church. And all I'm saying is, let's slow that down a little bit and think, how can we just develop a stronger relationship with Jesus? And if all we're doing that, and then utilizing the resources the church have, and realize that not every ward, not every branch, not every group is the same, not every stake's the same, and we have unique issues. But the thing that isn't unique is the process of helping someone discover who Jesus really is and strengthening their relationships. And so it's creating those moments that people can look at and feel strength. And then once they have that, they're going to want to share. And that's how transformation happens. And so I would say that's the advice that I have on that. And I don't think I would ever deviate from that, just because I think there's a need in the world today, and especially, here in LDS culture, there's just a need. And I think it's not a unique need just for us. I think it's in other denominations too, and especially this new generation coming up, they're thinking a little bit differently than past generations, and people are having a hard time communicating to them. And all they want is authenticity. They don't want anything to be like sugar-coated. They don't want anything to be, the blinds pulled over their eyes. Just tell them the way that it is. But if you show them the light, you show them the truth, you show them Jesus, I'm telling you, they're the most amazing generation that ever walked the face of the earth. They're wanting to, they want to identify with something. They want to identify with a specific cause, and they will mobilize. They will literally go and mobilize. We're seeing it all over the world right now. There's an identity issue that's happening in the world. And the reason why is because people are trying to figure out who they are. And then two, there's a lot of mobilization for their causes of their identity, and that's what's going on. Well, I want that identity to be sons and daughters of God with a deep relationship with Jesus, because if they can get behind that, that's how we change the world.
Yeah.
So but it's more the way that Jesus taught. But they really want to mobilize. They really want to understand, who they are and where they fall into in line. And I think the most important thing is the essence of what they can do, and they can do things that no other generation can do, from my perspective. And so, I think it's our utmost importance to, especially our kids, is to help them have that deep relationship with the true Jesus, and not this Jesus that is stern, that's going to, send them to hell, but it's more a Jesus that is loving and understanding, and they understand the reason why they are the way they are. And it's just more deepening, even though that it's maybe not the best that they are, and they need to change, but it's through his love and his grace that they can be a better version of them, the best version of them. And so I think that's the ultimate goal for leaders and parents, is to help this rising generation.
Yeah. So take me to like the nuts and bolts of that, because I think a lot of leaders will listen and be like, oh, well, we focus on Jesus, we're good, right? But maybe it looks different for them. So like when you're extending a chance to speak in church, like how do you encourage that speaker to make sure that they stay on Jesus, rather than, because maybe it's like, well, I want you to talk about temple work. And to me, that kind of feels, well, I think Jesus is in there somewhere, so it's good to talk about temple work, right? Or if there's like real life examples of what we think it looks like, but what it really looks like. What comes to mind? Yeah.
So anyone that thinks that they talk of Christ in their congregation, just do it an analytical approach. That's what I did. So I just took a piece of paper. Anytime that somebody said Jesus, I did a scratch mark for one thing of Jesus. And there's sometimes I had 0 scratch marks on, a 3-hour meeting, back when we had 3-hour meetings. And so for me, it was really important. The second thing is, and this will help answer the question that you just asked. But I do believe that setting the tone will create the ability for brothers and sisters to go and do. And let me kind of explain that. I noticed in fast and testimony meeting, when in my ward at the time, that the children and the women dominated. We'd have maybe 1 or 2 male, people that would bear their testimony. And I thought, do you know what? We need to change this. So I was a counselor in the bishopric, and I talked to the bishop. I says, hey, we need more of our priesthood strength testifying, and not letting them just let everybody else go for it. We got to figure out a way to do it. And he came up with the idea of, and it was a beautiful idea. And this is when we had opening exercises at priesthood, just having one person bear their testimony at the beginning of our, opening exercises of priesthood. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting, it got people to hear, listen, and connect to people, and they could feel. And you had these powerhouses, people that had wealth of information, testifying the first time on the stand in years, and that bled over to sacrament meeting. And as soon as sacrament meeting, it was really interesting. By the time I became bishop, it was like 60-40, 60% male, 40% female, and children. And then later on, it was probably about 75-25. So we had to figure out, okay, how do we get it back to about like 50-50, whatever. But like setting the examples there. And so when I say, they're might saying, hey, all these topics go back to Jesus, I'm just saying being more intentional of what you're asking. So like for example, if you're talking about temple endowment, I would be very specific about the covenant path. What is the covenant path? How does the covenant path strengthen your relationship with Jesus? That is the topic, not going and doing temple work.
Yeah, you almost like take that topic and then attach at the end your relationship with Jesus Christ. Right?
Yeah.
Put Jesus at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not just to do a filler. And then you can't go over the phone and just say, okay, would you do this, and not even do it. You got to give them a piece of paper, say, here's the topic. We prayerfully considered it. Here's some resources. There's other resources you can look at. But this is what we'd like to accomplish. And I'll tell you, I know this seems like odd, but when I would call someone, regardless of who they were, I would say I was prayerfully considering it, because I was. And there are a few people in the congregation that come that need to be strengthened with this. And when I prayed about who is the person that would be best to deliver this specific message, I'm led to you. So can we have a conversation? Does it resonate with you?
Yeah, I love that.
9 times out of 10, they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Like, I literally would love to speak about this. I'm so passionate about this, right?
Yeah, I love that.
But the other, 1/10, that doesn't have, they're just afraid to get up in front of everybody, but they're still passionate about it, and they're still going to do it. And so having a directive of the why and the who, you don't need to tell them specifically who it's impacting, but you can give examples of some of the things that are facing. That will help them be a lot more prayerful as they approach this assignment. Yeah. And I think that needs to be done in callings too. And I think, I'm going to get on a soapbox, Brad.
Oh, boy.
I got to
wheeling it out.
I got to get on a soapbox here.
Now's your chance.
Oh my gosh. No, but just because we feel inspired to call someone to a calling doesn't make it the right call for the individual. And I think that we need to stand up as members of the church. When we feel overloaded, I feel like we need to do a good job of informing the leadership, hey, this is what's going on in my life, and I want to explain every little detail from there before you issue this call, because I want you to be aware of all the stuff you didn't know, because we're having this conversation now. And I would like to see that happen more, because I think we get overloaded and compounded where we're not able to do the things that we need to do because we feel a sense of obligation, a sense of stewardship, and then a sense of living up to what it means to be in that position. And I believe, and this is what I've seen, and it might be different in the different parts of the world, but I've seen people hit their point of being asked to do everything, and we're not distributing the work, properly, and they get burned out, and they literally leave the church, and they become very bitter. And then I've seen others that just literally just disconnect completely, and I think by having good conversations and talking about the why with them and having the people respond back with everything that's going on in their life, we still need to serve regardless, right? But it's just more, is that the correct place and time and the timing and sequencing in their life?
Yeah.
And I think we need to be a lot more sensitive to that. But, as of late, I think we're doing a better job. I think there's less pressure to do all these things. Like I remember sitting in priesthood leadership, and they're like, you got to do all these things right here. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, we don't even have the manpower to do all these things. Yeah. Does everybody need 20 callings? Yeah. Like, is that what it's going to go on? And
gotta have faith,
yeah, trust me. I've had that lecture. I've heard that lecture a lot, but
yeah.
But there's some beautiful messages, and I'll share one. And I know this is long, and I know it's a Brad Derral conversation. But
I've got Brad on deck here.
Okay,
so.
But I was in a priesthood leadership meeting where. About every 2 to 3 years, you get to meet with a member of the Quorum of the 12. All the bishops do in your region. And we were in a coordinating council. We had 2 coordinating councils, and we had Elder Renlund there. And he wanted to shake every bishop's hand and every stake president's member's hand before the meeting start. And, he's a great guy, and I've met him a couple times before.
He actually came to a meeting like that I was at.
Oh, good.
And I shook his hand.
You shook his hand?
Yeah.
He did the exact same thing?
Yeah, same thing.
He just does that.
Yeah, he's great.
So it's a 4-hour meeting. So 2 hours was uninterrupted, him ranting about whatever he wanted to do, which was really great. Yeah. And I loved it. It was like the Spirit was present and, helping us understand the nature of our call, the sanctity of our call, and so on. And then the last 2 hours was open up to Q&A. And I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to talk. I don't care who they are. I don't care if it's a prophet. I mean, I'm respectful, right? Yeah. But there was something eating at me, and I wanted to have an answer to it. And then 2, I wanted to really help members of our congregation. And so I raised my hand, and he goes, President Eves. And I'm like, oh, you knew my name. He says, you shook my hand like 3 minutes ago. Like, I think it was like 2 hours ago. But anyways, I stand up. He says, what's your question? I says, hey, I go, all of us have the privilege to do these temple recommend interviews, and these temple recommend interviews are very sacred, and you got to see just amazing experiences. It's one of my things I look forward to every week. And I says, I've been noticing a pattern of people feeling overprogrammed and people feeling overburdened. What advice would you give us, to give them? Because I would like to know, what you're thinking and how we can help them in this need. And so I go to sit down. He says, you can't sit down after that question. I'm like, oh, man. But then he gave me a beautiful story where he went to Asia with Elder Packer. And this is when he wasn't a member of the Quorum of the 12. He was in the presidency of the 70. And they were doing a temple dedication, and they were trying to get all prepped for that. And he said, I was given the assignment by Elder Packer to go to this member of the 70 that was working in that area. And he didn't give me the name or anything like that. He just kind of kept it in this regard. And he says, and he needed to deliver a certain message to him. And I went to go deliver the message to him. And the message was this: Elder, you don't have any faith. President Packer would like to talk to you about your faith tomorrow, in the morning. Oh, wow. I'm like, wow. And he said that 70 stewed all night. And he's like, why are they even saying that? I literally just stayed up 48 hours trying to get all this stuff arranged for them for this temple dedication. I'm doing this, and this. And here I am busting everything to make this happen, saying I don't have faith. That's not right. So he was even just huffy and puffy. So Elder Renlund and Elder Packer went and met with this elder in the morning and says, well, did you get my message from Elder Renlund? And he says, well, yes, I did, and I'm actually offended. I couldn't even believe you say that. Look, I've literally dedicated my life. I've put my business life on hold to be a 70. Why are you even thinking that? And he goes, oh, my dear brother, this is the Lord's work. This is not your work. You need to have faith that the Lord will do all those things. You don't need to stay up for 48 hours doing all these things. You need to do your best and let God do the rest, because it is his work, not yours, and have faith in that. Uh-huh. And he walked out. It's like, wow. And he says, so tell me, what do you think about that? And I says, well, that tells me that we need to do the best that we can, but we don't need to do all that we think we need to do. We just need to do the best we can. And this is God's work. We need to have faith that it's his work, and we're just assisting him in this work. And so it was a beautiful story. I was able to share that experience a lot with members of our congregation, our stake. And it helped them feel at ease to say no sometimes, and to feel like, oh, do you know what? This is probably not the best situation for me right now. And some and I feel really bad, because there's some members that will take 4 or 5 callings. And how can you do that to someone? You're just really, even they might seem small, they just add up. And, my goal is just to look, hey, we all need to help build the work. That's what we're called. When we go from discovering who Jesus is to become a follower of Jesus, but the moment that we become a disciple, we become his hands, we become his tool. We become his to go out and do the things. And we need to be mindful of what that is. But in that same regard, we're not Jesus. This is not our work. Yeah. We're here just called to assist. Yeah. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so I think, even what we're doing here with The Chosen, and I think it's we're assisting in our little way, and we can do it uniquely. And I think every ward, every family can do it very uniquely, but they just need to give it a lot more priority of how do we actually have these conversations that impact people. And we have discussions of what the gospel is really about. Yeah. Not the organizational structure of the church, but what the gospel is really about.
And I love the episode, I believe it's season 2, where the Christ isn't in the series a lot. He's off healing and praying with people. Yeah. And the disciples are bickering the whole episode.
It reminded me of church word council. It did.
Right. And then at the end, Christ comes back and he's just exhausted and just going straight to bed, and just that moment is powerful.
Well, what I would love about that moment is because they're like, look what we did, and this is where I'm at, and I'm better than this, and whatever. And here Jesus is in Samaria, healing through the day and into the night, and he comes back physically, spiritually, emotionally exhausted, and everybody realized, oh.
Yeah, like the big picture.
Yeah. It's like, oh.
Yeah.
So we need more of those moments,
Awesome.
to wake up for sure.
All right, Brad, coming back to let's reset to my original question. I'm curious for your perspective is you're creating content in the concept, in the context of The Chosen. So like your approach to like how leaders can create content worth talking about. Anything you would add on to what Derral said, or your own perspective there?
Sure. I'll just say amen to a lot of what he said, but I'll add another spin on this, and that is I think leadership requires us to create the context for content to not just come from the podium, but to be experiential. I think that one of the things that has been deepening in my life is the relational aspect of the Savior versus what I considered in decades past the transactional part of Jesus. So I think so often when someone gets up at the podium and teaches the truth from a Jesus doctrinal perspective, we can only, not only, the best way, I believe, to incorporate that into our lives is to hear our own vocal cords talk and be a part of bringing the doctrine of Christ into the conversation. So there's a time and a place for someone to stand at a podium or someone to stand in front of a classroom and teach doctrine. But I believe we frequently miss the next piece, which is the gathering of saints is a community experience. It's not a social experience. I mean, we make it social, but the community of Christ, the body of Christ, requires us, I believe, to experience Him together. So I'll be practical for just a minute. Yeah. Just after the Come Follow Me program was introduced, my wife and I had returned from New York City, back in the Utah ward, and we know those can be big. And this was big enough that it needed to be split, but it couldn't be for whatever reason at the time. And so we were called to be the gospel doctrine teachers. And, there was just no way everyone was going to fit in the Relief Society room. And I asked the bishop, would it be okay if we met in the cultural hall? And he's like, well, that's going to be very impersonal. I don't know how that's going to look. I said, well, please just let us try something. So in the cultural hall, at the beginning of every gospel doctrine class, we split everyone into 9 groups. And those 9 groups sat in a circle, and they had their own conversation about this week's Come Follow Me. And only in the last 15 minutes of class time did we turn our chairs together, and then we simply allowed people from the individual groups to speak into that week's topic. So it's the easiest gospel doctrine assignment I ever had.
Yeah.
Because I prepared only as a participant, just enough to be able to facilitate the conversation. Yeah, so those last 15 minutes were all about tying it together through the voices of these 9 different groups. Yeah. And it was such a beautiful experience. And people would comment all the time that it was coming alive to them, the gospel, because what happens in those groups when there's no kind of teacher is we sit there together and we say, well, this is what I read this week, or I didn't read this week, but this is what I'm dealing with this week. And we kind of create context for the gospel. And I think that's where Jesus becomes alive to us, the context. And I think that's the beauty of what we're doing at The Chosen, because biblical narratives have been created throughout time. Our own church creates beautiful media that essentially quotes Scripture. What did Jesus say? What was his setting? But what has been lacking up until now, and what we get with The Chosen, is participation. So we get to watch these characters who are actually part of this Jesus journey. And we identify with them, and the most common comment we get from people about The Chosen is, it feels so real, and I can actually relate to Jesus, but, I am Matthew. I see myself in Matthew, right? Yeah, or pick the character. I'm a Mary.
Yeah.
And in that, what people are saying is, I'm experiencing Jesus, right? Yeah. And I think as leadership, we need to look for opportunities for people to experience it together as a body. And again, not taking anything away from our personal initiatives, what we do at home in the privacy of our closet. I'm just saying that leaders need to facilitate that when we gather, it needn't be just review the doctrine and everyone occasionally might raise a hand. Let's make it an experience, and we can do that every Sunday.
And I love that concept of our goal is to get everybody to speak of Jesus today, with their own vocal cords, not just listen to what the other guy, that was an interesting insight, and make a note, or even just sit there. How can we get more people to speak of him? And that does a lot of the work of bringing people to Jesus.
Yeah. I'll give you another example.
Yeah.
Just this past Sunday, we released a documentary where we took 9 Gen Zers and we exposed them to The Chosen. They'd never seen it before. We asked them to come together and binge watch it.
And you sent me the link. This is a phenomenal documentary.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
Interesting story. This documentary was produced twice.
Oh, really?
You'll only hear the story here. The first time it was produced, they all binged it on their own. We rented an Airbnb. We had 10 rooms with cameras, and everyone was sent to their room to binge. And then they would come together at lunch and at dinner, and a facilitator would sit at the head of the table. In the evening, it was around a fire pit, and would facilitate a conversation around what they had just binged. We looked at the finished project, and I was there for the entire shoot, and the whole time I was watching this play out, I was like, yeah, it's interesting to see people laugh or cry or whatever as they watch the show, but they're not getting it. It's a passive experience. So, we spent a bunch of money doing that, and we said, we're going to spend money again, we're going to do it all over. And we're going to take the learnings from that first experience, and now it's going to be different. And so the second time, we still recruited these people that knew nothing about the show.
Different group.
Yeah. Different group.
And all they knew is they were coming to
watch a popular show. We told them there's this popular show.
And some say, I think it's Grey's Anatomy. Others said, whatever. But
the last thing they thought was that it was going to be a show about first century Jesus. So they came together, and we said, you know what? They need to watch it together. It needs to be a shared experience. And there needs to be some relational trust built first. So the night before, we asked them to go to dinner. We didn't go with them. The producers didn't go with them. We just said, go spend time together. And they arrived the next morning. They all knew each other's backstory. They came from all over the country. And instead of being in their separate room now, they were in a makeshift communal living room. And they watched the show together. There was no one to facilitate. When each episode was over, we just turned on the mics. The cameras were in the background, and they just had whatever conversation they wanted.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And we would say the Spirit did the rest. Now, they may have not have identified as the Spirit, but it was the Spirit, because the Spirit will witness of truth. We know that. And even though this is a fictional story, and we're not saying at all that that we're quoting the Bible here. We're just saying, based on biblical events, we're creating a story around it, a narrative, and they're experiencing that. And people might, again, be critical of The Chosen, sometimes say, you're playing my emotions. Well, first off, that is storytelling, emotion.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the central character of the story is Jesus. We believe he's divine, the Messiah. And so we believe the Spirit will witness to people just by watching it. And then by creating an experience, it becomes a part of them. And so the story of this documentary is following these 9 Gen Zers, not only as they watched it and hearing what they say, but what happened after. What was their journey? What impact did it have? And I'll tell you what, we learned from that first experience a lesson that I should have taken from my church experience, from that gospel doctrine lesson. But it's the same principle. It became part of them.
Yeah, getting that community together and experiencing it together totally shifted the dynamic, right? Yeah. And that's another, Derral, you mentioned this as far as the concept of seeing broken people. Like that's what stood out to you when you first saw that Shepherd film. And I think, we hear this concept of like creating vulnerability at church and being real. And I think a lot of leaders resonate with that. And often they don't know, well, how do you do that? We can't just say, well, be vulnerable, everybody, like go ahead, right? But it's all in the modeling. And one thing I learned from The Chosen is that you take these characters and you let them model the vulnerability and the brokenness, and then we sort of put ourselves into these characters as they engage with Jesus. They're like, yes, that's my Jesus, right? Like I have one friend who refuses to watch any clip or anything with Jonathan, the guy who plays Christ, because he doesn't want him to see him outside the context of being Jesus, because now I know how Jesus looks at me and looks at and heals and loves, right? And so, I mean, in part of your testimony thing, you took the opening exercise this time, and you could do this at the beginning of Elders Quorum Release Study as well, and saying, we're going to have this man stand up, and he's going to bear a testimony. And what you're doing there is you're modeling to the group, this is how we do it, right? Anything to say on that as far as how this show, stimulates that realness, that how Christ approaches brokenness and allows us to be real?
Well, I think if we all realize that we're all broken, that makes us a little bit more humble, for sure. But I want to give this in context, because I think this will help from this analogy, this perspective. But look at the scriptures for what they are. And if you were to say, okay, who had the most pages in the Old Testament, that wrote the most, that really gave us the most content? A lot of people would think it's Isaiah, but it's not. It's actually David. And in the New Testament, if you were to say who wrote the most pages, who gave us the most content, outside of Jesus, because Jesus was that third person, he didn't write anything. Right. It was definitely recorded from him. It would be Paul.
Yeah, that's where my mind went. Yeah.
Okay. Uh-huh. And then in the Book of Mormon, you have Alma the Younger. And in the church history, Doctrine and Covenants, you have Joseph Smith. What do all those 4 people have in common? Yeah, they were both prophets, but they were human and they made human mistakes.
Incredibly flawed.
Right? Yeah, people need to realize that Jesus calls flawed people to lead their congregation. He just does. And if you can look at the approach and the love that Jesus had for those men, in that scenario, taking someone that's broken and trying to make them better, and they've made some pretty bad mistakes, over the course of their lifetime. But the reality is that doesn't take away the truthfulness of what Jesus is trying to do, and it doesn't take away the truthfulness of what the gospel is all about. And I think that's the misconception: is we don't need to be a perfect person. We just need to be striving to be better. And really finding them. And so I think authenticity will actually come from being real. I want to share one with you because it rocked my world. It did. I was a teenager and I was having a struggle of knowing if the church was true or not. And this guy moved into our ward. His name was Brother AC. He didn't know much about him. My dad was the bishop at the time. And called him to be the Sunday school teacher for the 15, 16 years olds. I was 13 at the time. However, every youth gravitated to his class, and other teachers would get really mad and trying to pull people out. But here's this guy, and he was in his 80s. He looked like Mr. Magoo. He's bald, had a big old nose, and they were just kind of gravitating toward him. Now, the beautiful thing that my dad did as the bishop is says, well, in this scenario, let's just go ahead and just have all the kids go. If they're going there, they're getting what they need. We'll just do it a little bit differently. And if the state tells us we're doing it wrong, and then they can take it up with us at that time. But he personally had a relationship with Jesus, and he was very authentic. He was very cautious of how he taught the youth, and he was very, very magnetic. And for me, I remember one lesson coming in. He goes, I want to just show you about appearances and how your appearance can change, and how you should never judge anyone that walks through that door of who their heart really is and how they're connected to Jesus. He goes, because it's all about Jesus. It's all about that love and passion for our Savior. And we just cannot be that judge. Jesus is the judge, And he goes, I'm going to show you something. So he took off his suit coat. And he always wore long sleeve white shirts. Had no idea why. He rolled them up, and he had two tattoo sleeves that he got back in World War II. And he goes, "This is it right here. This is who I am." And everyone's jaw just dropped. And he goes, "This doesn't define who I am. This doesn't define my relationship with Jesus. If you're judging me because of that, you don't know who Jesus really is." Jesus found me. Jesus rescued me, and he helped me understand that with real life, we have real problems. We have problems and we have issues, and we're going to always fall short because we're human and we're broken. But he found that when you can strengthen your relationship with God, Jesus can help you overcome so much that you're facing each day. And so he took that message, and when he passed just a couple years after the fact, and Elder Ballard, President Ballard, was presiding, was because he was good friends with him, and it was just a great man, And we just need more men like Brother AC. We just need more men and women out there that are just saying this is the way it is, not giving the false facade, but literally sharing from their heart and then being real. And I do believe it's a mistake if anyone's not willing to say, hey, this is where I screwed up in my life, and this is how I found God. That even if you skirt it and you put it behind something and you're not using that, then I don't think that you're using the fullness of what you learned from that experience. And it could help so many other people. And I've seen people transform because of someone's transformation. They hear of a transformation and they hear the struggles and journeys, and they're willing to take that step closer to Jesus. And so I think we just need to be more disclosing. I don't think we need to brag, oh, I did this and this and this and this. That's not the point that I'm saying. But I think at very pivotal times, we can talk about how we were broken and how we found redemption through Jesus Christ. And I think if we could follow the example that Brother AC gave to me when I was a young vulnerable person, it helped me. And I want to give a lot of clarity because he really impacted my life. I had a grandfather that really impacted my life, and him. I would definitely put those two individuals on a very high plane, because at that time in my life, I believed in a God. I just didn't believe in the church. I just didn't. I knew I needed to be what my parents wanted me to be, but I just didn't. I didn't like Joseph Smith. I'll be honest with you, man. I read stuff, whether it's true or false, doesn't matter. But I was confused why God would call this person to be a prophet, And what was beautiful was these moments that I knew two men, and I would say three with my dad and my mom and so on and so forth. But they were people that had really good relationships with Jesus, and that was appealing to me. And I knew that there was God. I knew there was Jesus. I just didn't know if this was all true or not. Yeah. And so I didn't go down a super dark path, but every year I was always questioning, is this true? Is it not? But it led to getting on my knees and realizing that God calls imperfect people to serve, and I'm imperfect, and that doesn't take away from the truthfulness of it. And so, luckily, I was able to get a very strong testimony and a deep relationship with Jesus, and And it's helped me, throughout my life and, my relationship with my wife and my kids and, and it's expanding. And I think the thing that we need to look at is just being true, being vulnerable, and being willing to share, And I think a lot of us will hear, oh, you could share this moment, but sometimes it's embarrassing to share that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yet the thought came to your mind that you should share it, and we don't. Let's utilize it for good, and I just think we just need to be a little bit more transparent on it. And I think too, we need to do it in a way that doesn't say, "Oh, sin's good," because that's not what it's
you
about.
Didn't feel this extra desire to get a tattoo after you
Right.
saw that, right? Yeah.
Not even remotely close.
Right.
But I think the big thing would be is what is the lesson, and how can you apply it? And I think as we are more vulnerable and we're sharing, and I think this happens more, it should happen more on the family level. And then too on the ward family level, of just really helping people, have a desire to know that we're not all perfect and we're all just trying to strive to be better as a group. So there's a lady that's been coming to church with my wife and I and her kids. She just got out of rehab, and she's been struggling, but she just wants to learn. She wants to know, and so we've been taking her to church every week, and you could just see her countenance just be a sponge, for the things that are there. And it's just like she's, still addicted to some things and stuff like that. But it's beautiful to watch the transformation when someone really absorbs Jesus of their desires, and to see her taking huge strides of life transformational moments, that stuff that's plagued her for years, just because her relationship's getting stronger with Jesus. Yeah. And it's just beautiful. And we called her this week and says, "Hey, we're going to pick you up." She's like, "I'm already at church." Like, "You're late. You got 5 minutes, whatever." But it's just like, this is good. This is what it's all about, And I know her story, even right now, is inspiring other people. She's inspiring people that was in rehab with her, of watching The Chosen and going to church and start going on the path that they knew they should have gone on, years before, but they just made dumb decisions, And I think that's what's beautiful. And I think the world just needs to realize that we're all broken, and we just need to go to the source of the healing source, which is Jesus, And anyway, I don't know. I'm really passionate about that, and I think we can do that in social media. I think we could do that over the pulpit. I think we could do this in very private, firesides. And then it should be done in a very respectful way, but use it like Alma did, and use it like Paul did, and use it like David did in scriptures, to really emphasize a point and realize what we have. And I know a lot of stuff that we've done and do will be for our posterity, but I think a lot of it could be shared now.
Yeah, and what I learned from that is that we often make the mistake of showing people who maybe appear as perfect as Jesus, when in reality we need to model people who are broken and have a relationship with Jesus. Right?
Absolutely.
And it's easy because we don't show your tattoos, because then the youth will, whatever. But that imperfectness, that brokenness, and then seeing how he walked with Jesus was changed your life. Obviously.
It literally did. And I think too, it's just like the culture of the church, we create this false facade. And I truly do believe this. I really do. It's just like, oh, they're literally an apostle, or they're a 70. And I'll share this experience too, but it's like, I met a 70 that rocked my world, and I'm like, how in the heck, about swore right there. How in the heck did he become a general authority, right? Because it's like, I couldn't place two wits of how that would happen. But it's just like we think that just because they're called, that they're perfect. You're perfect,
it out, yeah.
Right? But they're not. Mm-hmm. They're not. They're just people, right? And I went through it. I remember going to my stake presence and say, hey, I had this interaction on work with this general authority, and I'm like, I'm struggling with this one. And he's just be patient. And he was very great. He's like one of the best leaders I've ever worked with. But so I just went back and was praying about it. This was like 2 months worth of agony, it's not like I should have that agony, but it was just like, man, just the way that he was treating people was just so harsh, and so anyway, I remember the thought came to my mind, every once in a while I need a shark. I don't know if it was me, I don't know if it was God or whatever, but it was like, okay, if we're all tools, every once in a while he needs someone that smells blood and will actually go and do some of the stuff that's there. So there we go. God uses us for who we are.
Well, that's why, reflecting back on the series, I love the title of it, The Chosen, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but is in reference to the people that Christ chose, right?
Yeah,
These broken, imperfect people.
Yeah, chosen of the Jews, the chosen people, the Jews, and then also the disciples that he chose. Yeah.
And we're seeing the story of Christ through their stories. Yeah. It's remarkable, right? Tell me about, and Brad, maybe you can start us off with the interfaith effort that this has been. And you see, Dallas Jenkins, the director, evangelical, great, incredible Christian. There's a few times he's had to get on YouTube and sort of talk why he's working with Latter-day Saints, right? But it's so beautiful to see it come together, knowing that this interfaith efforts happening behind the scenes. So what have you learned just about that interfaith effort that maybe we could do a better job at?
Sure. Well, what I've learned personally is that there's some things that I now covet in the faith of my friends.
Holy envy.
Holy envy. There you go. Holy envy. So I love the prayers of my evangelical brothers and sisters, the spontaneity of them, the fact that we're building a new set in Texas right now, and I can be in a meeting with big burly construction guys, and we're stuck on an issue, and they'll say, "Let's pray, brothers," and they just offer up their hearts, and I know that they have commented as they've worked with Derral and I that they appreciate the work ethic of Latter-day Saints. They appreciate the kind of clean living, what they would call clean living. They appreciate the fact that we seem so affirmed, in our faith. I think we all within the body of Christ, not just the covenant people, but the whole entire body of those who love Christ, espouse his name, see him as their Savior, all those body parts have something to give each other. And it's so beautiful. Now, naturally, we're a persecuted people. We need to kind of get over that. I think this sense that we stand apart is true in the sense that we, as a covenant people and a temple-going people, we have something that's unique. Now, it just so happens that that's a stewardship for us. The work is going to be done. The gathering of Israel is going to be done. Will it be done exclusively by Latter-day Saints? Absolutely not. We have some keys that are going to bless the world and bless all of God's children. They're his keys, not ours. But we're all involved in the work of bringing people to Christ. And I'll tell you, I've never felt closer to a godly people than when I am with the broader community. Yes, I feel the Spirit in my sacrament meeting. Yes, I am blessed by my temple experiences. But when I think of the body of Christ now, I'm experiencing it in just beautiful ways. 12,000 people gathered 3 weeks ago in Texas as we shot the Feeding of the 5,000. So many people wanted to be a part, we had to split it into 3 days because we couldn't fit 12,000 people on set. And as you watch them come, Latter-day Saints and Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses and Messianic Jews and, yes, evangelicals, and together they were singing together. It was over 100 degrees all 3 days. They're all helping each other out. It was just this beautiful brotherhood that we just have to be open to the fact that it's not only possible, it's happening. We're the ones that get in the way sometimes. We think to be a true brother, we have to offer them a Book of Mormon as soon as we meet them.
Yeah.
How many Book of Mormons have you given out on the set?
Zero.
I don't think that's what God's calling us to do, is to get Book of Mormons out on.
I want to touch on something, because I know you and I have had conversations on this, Brad, but we do feel persecuted, and the history of the church, we have had a lot of persecution. During that time, we kind of circled the wagons, right? And we take care of ourselves. In fact, we came all the way to Mexico just to protect our community, just to protect the people that were coming in from all the outside forces, right? And then eventually it came into the United States. But we literally fled to the Rocky Mountains because of that. So my ancestors did that as well. And, I had ancestors that were murdered because of their faith, and I think at the end of the day, we've had that mentality of, let's just take care of our own and we'll go do the work for God. And we really sheltered ourselves and alienated ourselves outside the Christian community. And so much so that when we go and do, we're very active in our evangelism, that we're seen as a threat. And so there's always counterbalances from there.
Yeah.
But one thing that I can tell you, and this is what I know, and I think the gathering of Israel and bringing people to Jesus Christ is different than what people assume that it is, because it's bringing people to Jesus, and then they'll sort it out later. God will literally sort it out later. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, when Jesus comes and says, this is the path, people are going to go on that path that have a relationship with Jesus, regardless of their religious background, including LDS. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so I believe we just need to take a more active stance to bring more Jesus into the world, more into our lives, more into our community, and stop trying to capitalize on, we're the only people that have this. Well, bull crap. Mm-hmm. What we have is our relationship with Jesus, and there's some beautiful relationships out there that are a lot stronger than ours. And we need to collectively come together to gather. We need to collectively help each other in their ministries in different ways, because that's impacting lives right now. And I think we just need to, I don't know. I just see it clearly in the sense that we just need to collaborate in helping. And then we all have our different segments, and we'll continue to do the temple work. We'll continue to do the things that will take you on the covenant path. That's great. Mm-hmm. Right. But I think the biggest thing is the heart. The heart needs to change. The heart needs to transform. And I think that's where we can come in. And I think it all comes back down to, just getting out of the mode of fear and persecution and saying, no, it's more about love and inclusion. How can we do that? Because I see a day that, and it's coming, that anyone that believes in Jesus Christ will be, persecuted. And we need to gather together all aspects of people that believe in the faith. It's happened in Scripture. It's going to happen again, and what we need to do is strengthen our community, strengthen our neighborhoods, strengthen the interfaith efforts, of making sure that people can literally worship Jesus Christ, and I think that's something that we can't do alone as the church. And I think even our priesthood, general authority leaders and general auxiliary leaders, they do a great job leading the charge, and they have great relationships out there. But it needs to be more than that. It needs to be every person, developing and helping and understanding, and not thinking we're better than them, by no means. Right. But it's more about, how can we help each other? And I'll be honest with you, I think Brad hit it on the head. Is I feel some of the strongest times I've ever felt the Spirit is when it was multi-faith effort of bringing people to Jesus and being surrounded by people putting in their loaves and fishes, and I'm putting in my loaves and fishes, and we're all coming together doing something bigger than ourselves. Yeah. And that's what's beautiful. And I think we just need more of that. And if there's anything that the Chosen's doing, outside of just impacting the viewer, it would be, we're trying to inspire people to become better, to be more bold, to be like what the disciples of old were, very capable people, but very incapable of doing what they needed to do. They had to do it. And that's what I love about season 3, is where Jesus sends them off 2 by 2. And he says, okay, you saw what I taught. You saw the miracles. Now you go and do. And to see them go 2 by 2, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to say, wait a minute. But I think that's what we need to do, is just to figure out, how do we go serve in our area? But more importantly, how do we surround ourselves with people that are like-minded? And I think what's been fascinating was from the beginning, when people would find out that I'm a member of the church, some people were very put off, and there was a lot of flack that was going on. But as we talk about what Jesus taught, they were like, "Man, you really know the Bible. You really know." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm actually a follower of Jesus." And that's what it's about. It's just more getting past their misconceptions of what they think my religious background is. But the best way to do that is to show them my heart, of where my heart is, because you can't dispute that. And as we have those conversations, we find that we have brotherhood and sisterhood, and we're really this community. And I think the church as the whole, and we're talking members of the church, we need to look at the body of Christ as outside and bigger than what we see it.
And I love just the Chosen is such an example of, if we come together as a Christian community, look at what we can do, like what we can create together. So any other interfaith perspectives or thoughts to add to that, or does that sum it up for the most part?
We could go on. It could be its own podcast for that alone. I think you got two people that are more passionate about Christianity and the strengths and things that they're doing. It could be its own podcast, but I will say this. I've met many people that I knew had a deep relationship with Jesus, and a lot of them were leaders of the church, and a lot of it was Brother AC and my dad who's passed. And there's been people that I just knew had a deep relationship. Over the course of this last 4.5 years working on The Chosen, I've met a lot more people that have a deep relationship and love and relationship with Jesus.
Love it. Anything else you'd add to that, Brad? Or
I think I would just I spend a lot of time with Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus, and I've experienced people coming up to him and calling him Jesus, right? And it's not like just a celebrity. And I think what they're expressing, and Jonathan and I talk about this. In fact, we're doing another documentary, and this one is actually with Jonathan, where we travel the world with him, and he goes on a quest to kind of search out the impact Jesus has had around the world. But what I experienced on these travels with him is that what people are really saying when they approach Jonathan Rumi, unlike approaching Brad Pitt or some other movie star, is, "You represent something that is impacting my heart. I know you're not Jesus." We were actually in a coffee shop in Provo, and a woman came in and saw him and fell on her knees in front of him and said, "I know you're not Jesus, but you represent Jesus to me." And when I got up this morning, I was headed to court to fight for custody for my children, and I prayed that I would know that you, God, are aware of my situation. Now, we've all had experiences where God calls us to be intervention or at the right place at the right time, but what I think we're experiencing with The Chosen is not celebrity making. It's not hit making around a show. It's the vicarious experience of being willing to relate to deity, be willing to invite him into our lives to see the messiness, because, as you pointed out earlier, we're seeing it in his disciples. We're seeing how he's interacting with it and how quick he is to forgive and to teach. And we're saying, if he's doing that for them, could he do that for me? And that's relational. And so to me, that's the big impact here. It isn't that we've got a great actor who's playing Jesus better than anyone else. It's not that. It's the fact that people are being invited to maybe see themselves and to see Jesus in new and important ways.
Yeah. And I think it's the writing of, very deliberate writing of devout followers that have that relationship with Jesus and have gone to the lengths of really understanding Scripture and the impact of individuals. And one of our head writer, had some very dark times, and he found Jesus through those dark times. And so those surface, and that's what connects. It really does. And I think that's beautiful, and it is relational. It is so much. And I think it's more like we're just a TV show. We really are. But if we can inspire people to get into the Bible, get into the scriptures, like that's what we're about. If we're inspiring them to get back to church, that's what we're about. You saw the documentary, and when I had the idea of what would the impact be and how would Gen Z accept it, I was shocked actually to see how unfiltered they were and how broken they were too. We had no idea. Like some of these stories were just in a very, very deep vein. And those stories came out through what they saw, through what was being taught or what was being displayed in The Chosen, and it was just they were connecting and they were seeing and they were like, oh man, this reminds me of this. And they were having these conversations that I believe every family should watch, with their kids and have active discussions, on it. And so, but I like what Brad said, I do believe that it's the relationship side of this. And I think that, if it's inspiring new people to create content that can do the same thing, then we all win.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Brad, you get to plug everything. Okay. So if people want to see the show, if they've been living under a rock for the last couple of years, where do they go to check it out? And then also this documentary that just
Sure. So there's an app. It's both Android and Apple, just called The Chosen. The Chosen is also on smart TVs, Roku, Apple TV, Fire Stick, etc. You can also find The Chosen on BYU TV. You can find it on the Angel Studios app, our distributor, also on Peacock and iTunes and Google. It's everywhere.
It's in mainstream.
It's in mainstream. And in terms of this documentary, you'll find it in the Chosen app. It's also on YouTube. Right
for
now,
a limited time.
For a limited time,
yeah.
That's right. So maybe by the time the podcast's out, it won't be on YouTube. So the Chosen app would be the best place to go to see all of this great content.
And man, if I was thinking as I was watching that documentary, if you need an idea for a great youth activity night or get everybody together and watch the journey of these people, how Christ impacts them. And there's nobody came out and preached to them. There's no preaching, you should really keep the commandments a little bit better. Like they just experienced a depiction of the Savior, and to see that change is just,
I would rather have ward councils do it. Cause it's like, okay, here's what our youth are actually thinking.
Yeah.
Here's the situations that they're actually being, impacted by.
Cool. Awesome. All right, last question, and I'll start with you, Derral, then you, Brad, is just your own personal heart and journey with Jesus Christ, like working on this project of The Chosen. How has that been enriched, that your relationship with Jesus Christ?
It's impacted me on multiple levels. I think the first off is he's helped me realize I'm more broken than what I thought I was before doing this. And then two, I think the biggest thing is seeing him even more real than what I thought he was too. Like I had a lot of ideas of how it would be, and I even imagined how it'd be when Jesus was in his ministry, but this went deeper. And just to even think of scenarios that could have happened, just really bring me to tears and really more appreciation for him. Because I'm nothing without him. Literally nothing. And he's so forgiving. And I just wish the world would know, especially our youth and our members, of how loving he really is. And I think this is the journey for the last 4.5 years, is just realized how patient he is and how loving he is, and how much my preconceived idea of who he is was actually wrong.
Awesome. Brad, how do you respond? How's this project changed your relationship with the Savior?
Well, since we're speaking to an audience of leaders, I'll just say that as a young bishop, I remember looking in the mirror and saying, I I'm not ready to be a bishop. I don't have the kind of relationship that a bishop should have with Jesus. I'm going to be asking people to do things on the basis of my mantle, but I myself am not measuring up. And so relationally, my experience with Jesus as that young bishop was one of measurement. It was not one of acceptance, meaning I was still on a path to prove that I could do it, that I could be a great bishop all by myself. I needed the Lord, but he'd tell me what to do, and I'd just go do it. And
how'd that turn out for you?
Yeah. He called me a second time as a bishop, so I could try again. Totally different the second time. But I would say that the experience that I've had in journeying with Jesus now is one where my prayers are not to increase my faith in him. My prayer is to receive the love that he has for me. Because I believe that what had been my barrier as a young leader was that I knew the truth about me, and I could accept the fact that he called me to be a leader because I'm a hard worker, I'm an effective administrator, I'm a good public speaker, I can do those things. But I can't accept the fact that he unconditionally just accepts me right where I'm at without all of those things. And especially as a leader, because we're supposed to have it all together. And I didn't have it all together. And when I was called as a bishop the second time, I still didn't have it all together. And then in a stake presidency, and I still didn't have it all together. And I'm willing to bet when you attend my funeral, because you're younger than me, I will not have had it all together. But my journey is one of receiving his love, accepting his love. And the more I do, the more I experience what he offers others. Whether it was Enos or Alma the Younger or Paul, their hearts turned to others when they received the love of God in their life. And that's the journey I'm on. As I receive it, it's freely given to everyone around me.
That concludes this episode of the Leading Saints podcast. We'd love to hear from you about your questions or thoughts or comments. You can either leave a comment on the post related to this episode at leadingsaints.org or go to leadingsaints.org/contact and send us your perspective or questions. If there's other episodes or topics you'd like to hear on the Leading Saints podcast, go to leadingsaints.org/contact and share with us the information there. And we would love for you to share this with any individual you think this would apply to, especially maybe individuals in your ward council or other leaders that you may know who would really appreciate the perspectives that we discussed. And remember, to get on the email newsletter list, simply go to leadingsaints.org/14.
It came as a result of the position of leadership which was imposed upon us by the God of heaven, who brought forth a restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when the declaration was made concerning the only true and living church upon the face of the earth, we were immediately put in a position of loneliness, the loneliness of leadership, from which we cannot shrink nor run away, and to which we must face up with boldness and courage and ability.